Can you really deport 10 to 20 million people? Think about this. Just to deport 1 million people, you need to stuff 50 jumbo jets filled with people and fly them back to their returning countries every single day, 365 days per year. And that's the end of the process. The beginning of the process starts with finding them, identifying them, surveilling them, detaining, arresting, going through the entire immigration process. It's expensive. You need a lot of ICE agents, more than we have right now. You need detention centers. You need beds. You need buses to actually make this happen. The State Department has to get involved because some of these people come from countries where we have no diplomatic relations, and they won't actually accept the people if we land in their country with the planes, like Cuba and Venezuela. So what do you do with those people? There are so many questions, and I had to get to the bottom of it. So I actually talked to Donald Trump's number 2 at the Department of Homeland Security during his first term. His name is Ken Cuccinelli. He was the acting deputy secretary of DHS, and he's a hardliner on immigration.
I brought you on the show because I want to talk about something that we're all talking about. Day one, soon to be January 20th. You know, we are just a handful of days away from Election Day promises. Donald Trump was very specific when he said, on day one, I will conduct the largest deportation of all time. And I was wondering, do you think that that is possible? Can Donald Trump conduct the largest deportation of all time on day one, January 20th?
Well, I think what will happen on day one to implement that commitment is all of the presidential instructions that are necessary to commence large-scale deportation will be signed on day one. Does that mean that ICE agents will, merely 5,000 ICE agents are suddenly going to deport 10 million people in one day? No, it doesn't mean that. But it does mean that the presidential authority to commence that effort will happen on day one. And will there be refinements after day one? Absolutely. Of course there will. Nonetheless, I think he will undo the Biden restrictions and implement his own presidential instructions based on his lawful authority to commence large-scale deportation.
So on day one, January 20th, like, you're not going to see raids in your communities. You're not going to see knocks on the door, abuela opening the door and then the whole family has to come out. You're not going to see, detention centers, everyone packed up on a plane and shipped off to their states. I mean, do you think there'll be any activity on day one besides the implementation, which I would just say is the order?
I think the key activity will be at the border itself. So yes, there will be actual activity on day one. But the day one activity will be the first steps, actual steps, not just orders, of sealing the border. Mm-hmm. And by sealing the border, I mean to illegal traffic, particularly between the legal ports of entry. We do have a nearly 2,000-mile border with Mexico, and of course, only a few points of legal points of entry, ports of entry for legal crossing and entry into the United States. That doesn't mean it'll be closed on day one, but you will see actual deployment of individuals. The Border Patrol, from the moment Donald Trump is sworn in as president, you go from 20,000 greeters who are executing a catch and release plan by and large, that's been reduced a bit the last few months, to actual enforcers of the border under Donald Trump. So you do get immediate enforcement on day one, but it won't be so much seen in deportation as it will be seen in securing the border.
Okay, so it's hyperbole when you say the largest deportation of all time. But who are these people that are going to be securing the border? Are these like existing Border Patrol agents who are just sitting on the sidelines right now, like sitting on their hands? Or is this like military force? I mean, you need money for people, right? For people to go to the border and actually seal it off.
So you don't need money for the Border Patrol agents because you've already budgeted it. And now you're just cutting them loose to actually perform the mission of the Border Patrol, which is to patrol the border, instead of being greeters, as I refer to them. So you do get that change, and that's a very dramatic change. You go from 20,000 helping people in to 20,000 keeping people out. It's a 40,000 person swing with no change in budget. I also fully expect deployment of military members on the border very quickly. I think that'll be some of the orders you see issued on day one, will be to deploy military members to the border between the legal ports of entry. And unlike the first Trump administration and the Biden administration, where they backed up the border patrol, provided reconnaissance, etc., but didn't do any confronting of people entering the country, I think the military will be used in Trump's second term to actually stop people from entering in the first place and to turn them around at the border.
Is that legal to use the military?
Absolutely.
Why didn't
No
Trump do
question.
it during the first term then, if it's legal?
The question of its legality isn't, in my view, why it wasn't utilized earlier. It was the reluctance to use the military. And as you heard Donald Trump in the campaign, he is over that reluctance. But look, this is an invasion. The first.
But why
job
was
of
he
the
reluctant in
president-
the first place?
I think because of appearances. That's it. And he also wanted to be seen using them to some degree. So the compromise was just what Joe Biden did. They were brought down near the border. They could see the border. They brought certain tools of reconnaissance with them, and but that was as far as it went. They never, in either administration, did any interdiction, and I fully expect the military to sidle up alongside the Border Patrol and do actual interdiction in between the legal ports of entry.
And you don't think that the courts are going to try to stop that, like a California injunction?
The courts can't stop that. They can't stop
can't.
that.
But they were able to stop the Muslim ban for a long time. You know, they were able, I know they eventually won, but they were able to hold up a number of other orders.
It is interesting that the second Trump term will benefit from a lot of that litigation having already happened in the first Trump term.
That's interesting.
That's the law of the land now. And the Muslim ban, as you referred to it, of course, involved more countries than just Islamic countries, but that was the press name for it, and that was upheld. The president under 212
Took a year, though, of time being litigated in the courts.
Right, and now that's been litigated, and at the Supreme Court level. That is an immigration law authority, and when you deploy the military, that's Article 2 presidential authority simply to provide for the security as the commander-in-chief. He doesn't have to let anybody in between the legal ports of entry under any circumstances, and he can deploy the military to stop the invasion, regardless of
Does he have to
whether
say
they-
we're at war at the border, or is that the way to do it? No
absolutely
declaration.
not.
Okay.
No. Hey, look, if Mexico doesn't declare war on us but walks people up into the United States, that doesn't mean it's not an invasion. We've been invaded here for years now, and the United States has the authority to defend itself. I'll flip it around. Mexico has long been in violation of international law, and specifically that it is a violation of international law to allow your territory to be used to harm a neighbor. And the cartels in particular, the gangs who are running the human trafficking business across that border and probably making more money in the last 4 years with human trafficking than they made in drug trafficking, and using that money to buy military grade equipment to militarize that border from the southern side. Mexico is in clear long-term violation of international law. We have the absolute right to defend ourselves against those violations and to block those people from entering this country, and the president doesn't need any additional authority than that provided by Article 2 of the Constitution.
Okay, so I do want to get back to the promise of the largest deportation on day one. Okay, Trump says that we have between 10 and 20 million people in this country who are here illegally that he wants to deport. His borders are Tom Homan. He's been on Capitol Hill, according to CNN, tempering expectations among Republican lawmakers who are excited for this deportation, right? But he's now explaining to them, like, this is going to have to happen in tiers. That a bit of Trump's language was hyperbole, shock and awe, perhaps to initiate some self-deportation, as you might say. People who are here illegally don't want to deal with that system and leave themselves without being apprehended, and they just decide to go, or to just sort of, thwart the incoming potential immigrants that see that this is not going to be a happy place to settle into. So essentially he's saying there are tiers, and he's told lawmakers he wants to remove 1 to 2 million people, and 1.4 already have orders of immediate removal. And there's just a recent report from NBC, Gabe Gutierrez. He reported on a raid in Chelsea, Massachusetts in late December, right before Christmas. And he wrote that it took 16 ICE agents to arrest 5 immigrants who are undocumented, right? And then they had to be released on bail by local jurisdiction after, they were arrested. So it's like, and apparently it took 40 to 80 hours of surveillance before the agents could even make the arrests. So it just seems like logistically, this is a massive hurdle.
So the logistics of this promise are massive. It is the biggest logistical domestic undertaking really of yours and my lifetime if they're going to come close to meeting the advertised goals of this campaign promise. No question about it. And that will take a lot of money, but if you're quoting a radical left-wing immigration group for the price, I think you're probably looking in the wrong place.
Okay, so what do you think? I didn't know that at the American Immigration Council, I guess from the name you could tell that they're pro-immigration, right? But what do you think the real price is to deport 1 million people? Let's break it down.
Sure. It'll vary by year, because once you have built the infrastructure, which has costs that are higher relative to the number of people you're deporting, then your cost per deportation is going to start to go down. So there's going to be a bit of a spike early and a drop later on a per deportation basis. Now, at the same time, those 1.4 million who already have deportation orders and another 500,000 or 600,000 who are criminals over and above their criminal entry of the United States. So they've committed a burglary or a homicide or a sexual assault or something else. Those come to just under 2 million. That's what I hear Tom Homan focusing in on as the first tier. But when you think about cost, I was an engineer before I went to the dark side and went to law school. I'm an efficiency nut. And one easy efficiency you're going to get with the Homan-led effort versus what you've seen in really any time before is that when they take your example of 16 ICE agents picking up 5 illegal aliens, they probably live with others as well. And under the Biden administration, for example, if your name wasn't on the target list, even if you were an illegal alien and they came across you, they said, have a nice day. They didn't deal with you at all. That's inefficient. And I have to think that that is going to end immediately under this administration so that the associations immediately in the proximity of targeted illegal aliens, including criminals and those already with deportation orders, will also be held and either processed out or that process will be commenced so that to speed along the next round with deportation orders.
This on day 2, can you get those 540,000 people who are in detention right now? I'm guessing if they have committed a crime, they're in prison somewhere. Can you just put them on a plane?
They are not just in a prison somewhere. Lots of them have been released, especially the ones in jurisdictions that use cash bail, for example, like New York, LA, Chicago, a lot of the urban centers. And so they've got to go be found. And as you alluded to, it is logistically challenging to find an individual. I mean, law enforcement does this all the time. It can be done for every single one of them. But to multiply that by 10 million takes a lot of man hours and a lot of just time on the calendar and money. I think the 88 billion number is probably about 4 or 5 times too high to accomplish this.
Not great at math, so I'm going to say that's 22 billion.
Yeah, my guess would be that across multiple years, you're going to be talking 10 to 15 billion dollars. So, but the Trump administration is asking for a lump sum up front, but a big part of that is also to finish the wall. It's also to do other things associated with this effort. And though I think finishing the wall, if they had the lump sum and could do it in an orderly fashion, could probably be done between $5 and $10 billion. And when I say finish the wall, I don't just mean the steel in the ground. I mean the roads built behind the wall. I mean the lights on the wall and the technology connecting the various sectors that minimize your need for manpower to be just as effective in keeping people out. So when we say the wall, we talk about a whole system, just to be clear. I also think that, as you also alluded to, the self-deportation, a phrase, ironically, that Mitt Romney came up with many years ago, a lot of that will happen by the cracking down on the issuance of work permits and the use of Homeland Security investigators to do vastly more workplace enforcement of the immigration laws that don't just put illegal aliens at risk, but also put the American employers at legal criminal risk. And I think that the reality that that's happening at scale will lead many employers to be, shall we say, a lot more careful in making sure they're complying with employment law, including the employment of people who are or are not here legally. And because so many people come here to work, that will lead a large number of people to return home because they won't be able to work anymore.
And that's the federal government that would deal with that.
Correct.